Greetings, Otaku Faithful. Thank you for joining me again this week. Once again, it's Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief, and I'm here to bring you yet again another Discussion of the Week video segment right here on Otaku Assemble! Weekly. As always, I'm here to bring you the latest in this week's Discussion of the Week video segment. And this week's Discussion of the Week topic, it's the one that you all thumbed up. 23 votes, as a matter of fact. So really good response this week. But this comes from YouTube user The Last Resort Host, and it reads, OAW vids like this are the highlight of my week. As for a suggestion, how about, when do you think it is appropriate to do a reboot of a series, or a retcon, or a reimagining? And when do you think those types of reboots fall short? When do you think they do well? What makes a good reboot? Okay, so pretty much the topic for this week is a discussion on reboots, and I will answer each of these questions. So the first question being, when do you think it's appropriate to do a reboot of a series, or a retcon, or a reimagining? I think it's appropriate to do a reboot when the material in which you're rebooting has fallen out of circulation, where the material has become somewhat irrelevant and forgotten in popular culture. This does not happen very often. This does not happen at all. Most of the reboots, retcons, reimaginings, whatever you want to call them, that we see nowadays is of material that is not that old, that is still highly fucking popular. And that's the whole point behind doing those reboots, because the people in charge of creating said reboots know that, oh, hey, you know, this is something that's kind of old, but people still remember it and it's still popular among that fan base, so let's reboot it so that we can milk that cash cow for all it's worth, and let's get some ass into seats. And that is taking the idea of reboot in the completely wrong direction. I mean, for an example, take the American horror genre in the past decade. I mentioned this multiple times in conversations I've had with friends after I saw Scream 4, which, if any of you all, if you haven't seen that film yet, I highly recommend it. It was actually really well done. I was surprised by how good it actually was as far as the material itself. Now, the film in itself is cliche as all hell, but that's because the Scream series have always been a parody of horror films, so they're supposed to have those cliches. But the social commentary, especially regarding Hollywood and the American horror genre that's in that film, is fucking genius. It's genius commentary. But part of that commentary in that film were the American horror genre, and the fact that every American horror movie, with the exception of, I would say, Darkness Falls, in the past 10 years has been a remake. It's been a remake. I have a problem with that, because here's my thing. It's okay. I don't so much have a problem with remaking old horror films that, quite honestly, most of us have never even heard of. Case in point, how many of you all knew that Last House on the Left was a remake? How many of you knew that, what's that newest one that just came out, Fright Night? How many of you all knew that was a remake? When a Stranger Calls, how many of you all knew that was a remake? Those type of films that are kind of smaller in scale and kind of more, a little bit smaller in pop culture, you know, those type of films that have a cult following, I don't mind remakes of those, because that brings that material, it makes it relevant again. It brings it back up to the forefront of pop culture. But when you're taking series like Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Friday the 13th, we know who those fucking characters are. We know those movies. Those movies are fucking horror genre juggernauts. You do not need to remake or reboot those films. So when do I think it's appropriate? I would say that appropriate reboots, projects that I think would be appropriate reboots. The Christopher Nolan Batman series, I felt like that was an appropriate reboot. Why? Because Batman Begins came out in what, 2005. The last film before that came out in 1998. It had been, what, 7 years since the last Batman film. So I think that merited a reboot, especially since that genre, that franchise got dragged through the mud with Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. So yeah, that film franchise needed a reboot. A project that I wish would get a reboot, Daredevil. Daredevil came out in 2003, I believe. That movie needs a fucking reboot. It's been, what, 9 years? That movie needs a fucking reboot. That's a franchise that needs a reboot. But for the most part, I think that reboots and remakes, like I said, unless the material has become irrelevant to modern day pop culture, it does not need a reboot. When do I think those type of reboots fall short? Like I said, whenever a company or a studio, whenever they're using it as a cash cow, that's where it falls short. And there are multiple fucking reboots that are coming out that I feel like they shouldn't be rebooted. Case in point, the Spider-Man film. I don't care for that film because I feel like, okay, like that Spider-Man film is coming out and it's a reboot. I don't care for it because I feel like it's too soon for a reboot. The last Spider-Man film came out in 2007. That was only 5 fucking years ago. I shit you not. 5 years to this May. 5 years to this May was when Spider-Man 3 came out. That means that this film was in production within 4 years since the last fucking film. That is too soon for a fucking reboot. And the only reason why that film is coming out is because Sony needs a film in production so that they can keep the license. There's too much bureaucracy around the fucking reboot. You aren't making it for the sake of rebooting it to keep it relevant and to keep it fresh, alive in today's pop culture. You're doing it for money. That is when a fucking reboot falls short, in my opinion. When do you think they do well? What makes a good reboot? Like I said, I think reboots do well if it's a material that the new generation aren't familiar with. Case in point, the new Thundercats reboot. I felt as if the Thundercats reboot did really well. Why? Because Thundercats is a very old school cartoon, and the way in which they've done the reboot, they've introduced this series, this franchise, and these characters to a younger generation, and the younger generation really got into it. I mean, one of the coolest things I saw was that this past Christmas, when I went back home and I was kicking it with my cousin, you know, that's my older cousin. Shout out to my cousin Armin, if you're watching this. But my older cousin, you know, me and him kind of grew up in geekdom, and you know, he was my older cousin, so it was kind of cool having that older family figure who, you know, into the same shit that I was into. But he was a big Thundercats fan because, you know, that's a cartoon that he came up with. I was a little bit young for Thundercats. But the cool thing was, you know, he has his own family now. And my little cousin Trey, his son, has all the Thundercats action figures. And he has like a Thundercats backpack and shit. And I thought that was really fucking cool because you are literally talking about, you know, his dad who grew up with the original series, and now he's growing up with the new series. So it's kind of like, you know, that passing of the torch type thing. Same thing with Star Wars, you know. Me and my cousin were big Star Wars fans, and his kids are into Star Wars too, you know. They got all the movies, and we had like this epic fucking 3-way lightsaber battle and shit. And you see what I'm saying? That's when reboots are done well, when they have managed to influence and to affect the targeted audience as they did originally. That's when a reboot is done well. And what makes a good reboot? I think at its core, at the center, I think what makes a good reboot is if you are wait, who is texting me? Who is this? Oh, okay, that's good. Alright, I apologize for that, scheduling a hair appointment. Anywho, but I think what makes a good reboot is when the material is when the material is presented in a new light. The same old material, but we see it in a new way. Case in point, going back to the Christopher Nolan films. What Christopher Nolan decided to do when he rebooted the Batman film franchise is that he decided to take us to the very beginnings of Bruce Wayne becoming Batman. And his whole trilogy, in essence, it is an origin story. It is a continuous origin story, because even the Dark Knight, Batman is still young. He is still new to being a crime fighter in the Dark Knight. And of course, in the Dark Knight Rises, we're going to take that a little bit further, because I think the time skip in the Dark Knight Rises is what, 8 months to a year? No, wait, I lie. I think it's been 3 years. But it hasn't been a very long period of time. So this whole franchise is kind of like this continuous origin story. I think that is what makes a good reboot. Also, the Man of Steel movie coming out next year, from what I've read, it's doing the same thing. It's taking Superman back to his origins, you know. Now, will they do it in the same way where this whole new story will kind of be him becoming Superman? I kind of hope they don't. Why? Because we've seen that with Smallville. Smallville is a good example, because that whole series was about Clark Kent becoming Superman. You see what I'm saying? So if the reboot shows, if the reboot introduces the characters and it presents the story in a new light, then I think that what makes for a good reboot. With the last couple of minutes I have left, I want to go ahead and I want to talk to you all about some reboots that technically aren't reboots, but technically they are reboots. 2 film franchises in particular that I've noticed this with: the Fast and Furious and the Underworld franchise. If you all have noticed, for any of you all who have seen the Fast and Furious films, the first 3 movies is kind of like, you know, a trilogy. But with the 4th film, the 4th and 5th film are direct sequels to the first trilogy. But they are in essence a reboot, because the 4th and 5th film are very heavy in story, and they're reintroducing the story to us with new elements, and they're showing it with new life, and honestly it's much more dramatic, and there's a lot more meat to the story now. It's more intriguing. There's more plot elements, and there's more story devices at play here. There's more thing at work, instead of just a bunch of cats driving fast cars in illegal street racing. Now we have, you know, international crime elements into the film. So those movies are sequels to the original trilogy, but they are rebooting the franchise, because now they're starting to take the franchise in a different direction. The Underworld, I have yet to see Underworld Awakening, but from what I've read about that film, it is a sequel to Underworld Evolution. However, the way in which the story is being told and the new elements at play, it's reintroducing the series and it's taking it in a new direction. So it is a sequel, but it's also kind of like a reboot. I think those are reboots that are done well. So with that said, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this video up. Once again, I want to thank the Last Resort host for the great suggestion, and by all means, guys, leave suggestions in the comments below for next week's discussion of the week. And like I said, if you see a suggestion that you like, thumb it up. Please, by all means, thumb it up. So what's coming down the wire later this weekend for the OAW YouTube channel? This week, instead of doing the manga of the month, I'm doing my anime of the month this week. So tomorrow you will see my first impressions of Black Lagoon. And then Sunday will be my comic book Hollywood review of Superman, Batman, Apocalypse. So with that said, this has been Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief. I'm signing off, and until next time, peace.